They thought she was just another civilian, quiet, unimportant, easy to overpower. The sun was high over a sleepy suburban street, its light brushing gently across neatly parked cars and trimmed lawns. There was no storm, no sirens, only the faint hum of cicadas and the occasional bark of a dog. She stood alone by the curb, her presence unthreatening, her voice calm. Yet in that silence, something unspoken crackled. The moment was heavy, fragile, like the second before glass shatters. And then the cuffs clicked, cold and undeserved, as if meant to teach her something. But it was they who were about to learn. One phone call. That's all it took to flip the balance. One quiet call that shattered every illusion they clung to and ended everything they thought made them untouchable. Where are you watching from? Stick around if you believe real power doesn't need to shout. Because this isn't a story of anger. It's a story of silent, unstoppable justice. Naomi Price had long learned the art of stillness, not the kind that came from fear or defeat, but the kind earned from decades of discipline, buried grief, and quiet resistance. She wasn't just a woman in uniform, though today she wore none. She was a soldier forged in silence, shaped by every room she had to stand in twice as tall, just to be seen half as much. Her strides were measured, her gaze steady, as she stepped out of her vehicle onto the sun-bathed suburban street that led to the classified facility, tucked behind an unmarked gate. No banners, no titles, just her and the echo of everything she'd survived to get here. The street was too quiet. A breeze whispered through the trees, brushing the edges of the moment like a warning. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a distant backyard, and a mailman paused mid-step as he spotted her. A neighbor behind the curtain watched her from a second-story window, uncertain if they should wave. Naomi didn't respond. She simply walked, head high, mind calm, aware of the weight she carried in her every movement. She wasn't in uniform today. That was intentional. She didn't need it to command authority. Her presence alone was enough, at least it should have been. That's when she saw them. Two officers across the street, leaning against their cruiser. One of them, a man in his 40s with a puffed chest and dark sunglasses, stood with folded arms and a jaw clenched like he was already preparing for a fight. Officer Brandon Myers. He had the kind of face that never truly listened, only waited to talk. Quick to assume, faster to act. Always in control, or so he thought. Next to him stood a younger officer, Kent Dawson, his stance less certain, eyes flicking between Naomi and his partner. There was hesitation in him, but not enough to stop what was about to unfold. Moments later, another officer appeared from around the corner, walking with slow, deliberate steps. Sergeant Dave Rolston. Late 50s, the kind of man who'd spent decades convinced he knew exactly what trouble looked like. And to him, Naomi, black, poised, confident, fit the profile too well. His words always came wrapped in courtesy, but the venom was in the tone. "Just doing my job," he'd say, like it explained everything. Naomi felt it in her bones. That shift in the air, the moment before contact. She could have turned back. She could have flashed her credentials early. But that's not what this day would be. She'd come here alone, without rank, without backup, to oversee something quiet. She didn't expect fanfare, but she didn't expect what was coming either. Still, she didn't slow down, because Naomi Price never walked away. She was only steps away from the gate when Officer Myers stepped off the curb, his boots landing with purpose on the pavement as if to cut her off from something he'd already decided she didn't deserve to reach. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. voice laced with authority that was more performance than protocol. "You heading somewhere?" Naomi met his eyes, calm but unwavering. "I have business here," she replied evenly. He tilted his head, a smirk forming as he adjusted his sunglasses. "I'm gonna need to see some ID." His tone wasn't a request. It was a test. Naomi paused, her breath slow, controlled. She reached into her pocket, but deliberately, not with urgency, not with fear. "You sure you belong here, ma'am?" he added. That last word dragged out like a leash. She looked up at him, expression unreadable. "Sir," she said quietly, "you don't know who I am." Her voice wasn't a threat. It wasn't even defiance. It was a statement wrapped in patience. Myers didn't like that. He gestured toward her again, louder this time. "Keep your hands where I can see them. Dawson, get over here." The younger officer approached, uncertainty flickering across his face. Naomi stopped moving. Her ID was halfway out of her wallet. The silence between them thickened. She inhaled slowly, as if to center herself, not just in body, but in memory. She'd seen worse, been through worse. And yet this, the assumption, the public show, the heavy implication in the officer's eyes, cut deeper than battlefield wounds. Dawson looked from Naomi to Myers, visibly hesitating. "Brandon, maybe she's telling the truth," he muttered, low enough to be ignored. Myers waved him off. "People lie all the time," he said, louder now, clearly aware of the small crowd beginning to gather. Neighbors peeking from porches, a jogger slowing down, a phone raised discreetly. Sergeant Rolston arrived just as Myers took a step closer. "We got a situation?" he asked, not looking at Naomi, only at the officers. Myers gestured toward her. No ID, acting shady. Naomi had said nothing since that first exchange. She simply stood there, her phone now in her hand, unlocked, thumb hovering over one contact. Rolston finally addressed her, voice smooth, rehearsed. "Ma'am, if you can't verify who you are, we'll need to detain you for questioning. It's standard." She didn't flinch, didn't argue. Her hands didn't shake, but the way she looked at them, steady, unblinking, was louder than protest. She made her choice. Dignity over argument, silence over shouting. Let them walk into their own mistake. Myers moved in. Rough, without warning, he grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her back. The cuffs bit into her wrists, cool steel pressing against skin that had once saluted presidents, signed top-secret documents, and saved lives without applause. Dawson's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Rolston nodded once in approval, already turning away. Naomi tilted her head down slightly, the phone still in her hand, still unlocked. Her voice, calm as a lake, just before a storm, whispered into the speaker, "Sierra Charlie 901. I'm activating protocol." And then she said nothing more. But the street? It would never be the same. The silence didn't last long. Less than 10 minutes after Naomi's call, the street began to shift. It started with a low rumble, almost like distant thunder rolling across the pavement. Then they appeared, 3 black SUVs, windows tinted, engines purring like predators. No sirens, no flashing lights, just presence, authority without announcement. The neighborhood, which had earlier watched with passive curiosity, now held its breath. Even the breeze stilled. The SUVs moved slowly, deliberately, as if they owned the road, and in a way, they did. They came to a stop in a clean line directly behind the police cruisers. Doors opened in sync, and men and women in dark suits emerged, their movements sharp, focused. One of them, a woman with short cropped hair and a briefcase in hand, walked straight toward Naomi without even glancing at the officers. Naomi hadn't said a word since the cuffs clicked. Her phone was back in her pocket. Her shoulders were still square, her expression calm, but something in her aura had shifted. She was no longer the detained civilian. She was the still center of a storm that was only now beginning. The suited woman reached her first. Without a word, she knelt on one knee and removed the cuffs with practiced care. There was no dramatic gesture, no display, just quiet, deliberate restoration. She handed Naomi a folder, sealed, marked with clearance codes, and stepped aside. Myers took one step forward, clearing his throat. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice lacking its earlier bravado. The Pentagon liaison turned her eyes to him slowly, like someone assessing a broken piece of equipment. "You just arrested a general," she said flatly. "Without cause. While she was en route to oversee your facility, you violated 3 federal protocols and obstructed an active defense operation." The words dropped like stones in water. Rolston's arms dropped to his sides. He didn't look up, didn't say a thing. His eyes were on the pavement, like he was hoping to sink into it. Dawson, standing just behind Myers, began to sweat visibly, a nervous tic developing in his left hand. He looked like a boy caught cheating on a test, not because he was guilty, but because he had no idea how deep the consequences went. Naomi still hadn't spoken. A second Pentagon agent stepped forward. "We'll be collecting badge numbers and formal statements immediately. All body cam footage is already being requested by Homeland Command." Myers opened his mouth again, some instinct to argue rising in him, but no words came. He glanced at Naomi, finally seeing her, not the woman in jeans and a blouse, but the force behind the eyes that had never blinked once. Rolston shifted his feet but didn't move. Dawson looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Naomi stepped forward. Not fast, not theatrical, just enough to remind them she didn't need a uniform or a podium to lead. The agent at her side said something softly, an update, perhaps, but Naomi raised one hand slightly. She would speak now, and when she did, it was without venom. "The issue," she said, her voice low and smooth, "is not that you didn't know who I was. The issue is how you treat people when you think they're nobody." The air thickened again, not with threat, but with truth, real truth, the kind that echoes. The woman who had been forced into cuffs without resistance now stood taller than every man on that street, though her height hadn't changed. It was something else, something invisible but undeniable. Power. Not the kind you take, but the kind you carry. No one responded. Not Myers, not Rolston, not Dawson. Naomi didn't need them to, because she hadn't come for revenge. She'd come for accountability. And now, the system, one she had helped build, one she had nearly bled for, was responding. Not with noise, not with fists. With silence, reports, and ruin for those who abused the badge. As she turned to walk toward the facility, the agents flanking her like a quiet guard of honor, one couldn't help but notice. She hadn't changed clothes. But she'd changed everything. The street that had moments ago been just another patch of suburban peace was now a hive of hushed chaos. Black government vehicles lined both curbs, agents moved with quiet purpose, and reporters, tipped off by a leak none could trace, had begun to gather at the far end, cameras raised like rifles aimed at reputations. The murmurs spread like fire through dry grass, and then came the voice that confirmed it all. A senior Pentagon official stepped forward, his badge visible, his tone surgical. "Lieutenant General Naomi Price, clearance level Omega-1. Director of Domestic Interagency Coordination and National Infrastructure Defense. He didn't shout it. He didn't need to. The title landed heavier than any accusation could. Myers blinked, his lips parting as though searching for a sentence he'd never memorized. We weren't informed, he managed weakly. She didn't identify herself. The official didn't flinch. She wasn't required to. You detained a high-ranking national security officer during an active classified operation. That's not just misconduct. That's a breach of federal protocol. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded. Rolston folded his arms, trying to armor himself with apathy. She looked suspicious, he muttered, defiance clinging to his voice like rust to old steel. He avoided Naomi's gaze. He couldn't afford to meet it. Not now. Not when the whole world might be watching. Dawson, standing just behind them, lowered his head. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But his eyes, locked on the ground, said everything. Shame, confusion, and the dawning realization that being silent in the face of wrong is its own kind of guilt. One of the agents turned to Myers. She doesn't just outrank you, he said plainly. She oversees you. Naomi stood a few feet away, posture regal, untouched by the storm around her. She could have spoken. She could have humiliated them publicly, listed their offenses one by one in front of the press. She had the clearance, the command, the platform. But she didn't. Instead, she let the silence speak. Her restraint, her quiet composure, became the harshest punishment of all. Her dignity, unshaken, now towered over them in a way no shout ever could. She looked at Myers once, just once, and in that glance was a history he could never understand. The rooms she'd walked into where she had to prove herself 5 times over. The slights she swallowed to lead with grace. The medals she earned in silence. And the choice, always the choice, not to let rage define her. Now the tables had turned, not with vengeance, but with justice. The shift wasn't loud, it was quiet, but absolute. Myers looked small. Rolston looked tired. Dawson looked broken. Naomi looked free. And as she turned toward the gate, credentials now visible, the street watched her, not just because of who she was, but because of how she carried what they could never take away. The aftermath came quietly, not with headlines or fanfare, but with formal reports, sealed decisions, and career-ending consequences. Officer Brandon Myers was terminated within 48 hours. No pension, no commendations, and no public defense from the department he had so long served. His superiors cited gross misconduct under federal oversight and closed the file without appeal. Sergeant Dave Rolston submitted his retirement papers the next day, but not before a closed-door meeting stripped him of honors he'd worn like armor. His final days passed in silence, the bitterness in him too old and too ingrained to evolve. And Kent Dawson, young, nervous, easily swayed, was spared, but not without cost. He was demoted, reassigned to mandatory federal retraining, and placed under probationary review. His record would always carry the mark of that day, a reminder that complicity is never neutral. Naomi didn't gloat. She didn't hold press conferences or accept interview requests. Her work, as always, spoke louder than applause. A week later, she stood in front of a classroom at a local school, this time in full-dress uniform. The children sat wide-eyed, awed not by the medals on her chest, but by the way she spoke, softly, clearly, without anger. One girl, no older than 9, raised her hand and asked, "Did you ever get scared?" Naomi smiled, crouched down to meet her gaze, and replied, "Yes. But I never let fear decide who I could become." Then Touching the girl's shoulder gently, she added, "Let them underestimate you. That's when you win." Later that evening, Naomi stood in front of her bathroom mirror. Her reflection hadn't changed. Same tired eyes, same steady posture, same quiet poise. But inside, something felt different. Lighter, freer. Not because justice had been served, but because she hadn't betrayed who she was to get there. She'd held her ground without raising her voice. She'd let the system expose itself. At the Pentagon, changes had begun to take shape. A senior officer approached her after a debriefing and said, almost in passing, "You've turned disgrace into doctrine. We're rewriting the training manual because of what happened to you." Naomi nodded, but said nothing. She knew it wasn't about rewriting one manual. It was about rewriting the lens through which authority sees dignity and learning what power really looks like when it's not wrapped in ego. Outside the facility gate, the same sun spilled across the street where she'd once been cuffed without cause. But the air felt different now. The neighborhood had seen something they wouldn't forget. Not the SUVs or the agents, but the image of a woman, calm and unbending, refusing to let assumptions dictate her worth. No signs marked the spot, no plaque commemorated the moment, but in the minds of those who witnessed it, that place had changed forever. Naomi walked alone now, hands free, shoulders relaxed, not triumphant, just whole. She thought of all the times she'd chosen silence when it would have been easier to scream. And now, finally, that silence had spoken louder than any protest could. "It's not about revenge," she would later tell a junior officer over coffee. "It's about never letting silence be mistaken for weakness again." They judged her by her skin, her silence, her calm, assumed she was just another face, just another body to command. But when she finally spoke, it wasn't to them. It was to a power they'd never understand. The very system they thought they owned rose up, not in fury, but in precision, and reminded them what true authority looks like. Naomi never shouted, never begged, never lashed out. She didn't need to. Her strength was never in how loud she could get, but in how still she stood while the world tried to shake her. Have you ever been judged before being known? What would you do if your dignity was tested in public, with cameras watching and silence pressing on your chest? If this story moved you, like and share it with someone who believes in quiet strength. Someone who knows that power doesn't always walk in with noise. It sometimes arrives in grace, speaks once, and changes everything. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay strong, stay proud, and never let anyone else define your worth.